Hello, students. Thank you for tuning in to this short little video about media. Now, I'm going to cover things relatively quickly, so hopefully this can be used as a review. You can always pause things if I'm moving too quickly. You can always rewind a little bit if you want me to go over a definition again. But let's dive into mass media. Now, you should have all had a reading about mass media, so hopefully you have some historical background as far as like how things have changed and evolved over time. But I always like to start with the big question with media organizations, with media companies. What is the primary responsibility of media companies today? Now, if you're responding to the video live as you're listening to it, hopefully you said something like to make money. Media companies, their goal is profits. A lot of them have shareholders, a lot of them have major corporations above them, and they have to make money. They have to make profits for them to be worth keeping. And media companies make money by advertising, advertising on those channels. Um, you know, Advertising companies and just companies in general that want to put ads on TV, they're looking for a news channel that's going to get a lot of people viewing it. If a lot of people are viewing that news channel, that leads to um, you know, more viewers, more hits for their commercial. So, for example, why are Super Bowl commercials so expensive? Well, there's a huge chunk of the population that's guaranteed to tune in and watch not only that game, but also watch for the commercials. So that makes those media companies a whole lot of money. Now, certainly they do other things. Certainly they have some other roles out there which are really important. And media plays a very important role as a linkage institution in our society. But you always have to remember that CNN and MSNBC and New York Times and Fox News and all those different organizations, their goal is to make money in the big scheme of things. Now, media has evolved a lot. Of course, when the framers were creating the Constitution and when the revolution was going on, print was a major part of their society. They had newspapers, they had pamphlets. You guys know the Federalist Papers were published, Brutus was published. We're talking about print media being used to push for ideas. There, you literally had people using print media to influence other people and to influence government. That's the perfect example of a linkage institution, right there in the time of our framers, our founders. Then, of course, it evolved into to broadcast media. It evolved into media where you can listen to stuff on the radio and you can eventually see stuff on television. And this started to have a different type of influence. A president was able to talk to the American public, all of the American public, via the radio. If you think of like FDR and his fireside chats, a president was able to debate live on a stage with their opponent in an election. If you're thinking like JFK versus Nixon, and the visuals had an impact in who actually was seen as the winner of that contest, of that debate. So broadcast has become very influential in different ways. Hearing someone's voice can change things. Hearing someone or seeing someone can change the way you view them. Now, today, to be a politician, you not only have to be able to speak really well, you also have to, um, you know, kind of play the role as someone that's healthy and someone that has good visuals for people to tune in and want to listen to you speak. You also have to just be, you know, much more charismatic to be president today and to be a politician today. That the charisma has to be a lot higher than it used to be under the print media when you really didn't see the politicians. You never heard a president's voice. In fact, they never even campaigned really anywhere. They stayed home and people went out and campaigned for them with print media. Now, print has certainly gone down a bunch in recent years, but the major print organizations, Washington Post, New York Times, uh, Wall Street Journal, those organizations are still doing really well when it comes to online circulation. So where maybe paper circulation has gone away, and when I worked with newspapers, it always seemed like the literally the margins of the newspaper kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because they couldn't afford to have more paper. And as circulation's gone down, they found new ways to make money. making money through online stuff, making money through YouTube. There's so many more avenues today for a newspaper to make money rather than just circulation. And if you look at the numbers on this graphic, circulation's also not down horribly. It's been down further in the big scheme of things. So, what is kind of the ideal role of the media? The media plays really three major roles in our society: gatekeeper, watchdog, and scorekeeper. And these are terms that political scientists use often, and you should know them. First one is a gatekeeper. The mass media chooses what issues and topics become major talking points. The mass media picks and chooses what topics become the major talking points in society. Now, if we didn't have the coronavirus going on right now, we'd probably be able to better visualize this. Things that would be getting media attention would be stuff that's going to essentially draw in more viewers to their channel. Things that would be getting more media attention would be stuff that um, may not stick around for very long. And the media is picking these things for a little bit of time to get viewership, and then when it stops, affecting viewership, they stop talking about it. And when politicians are um, not talking about it, when the people are not talking about it, it's not something that's going to stick around with the media. The media is choosing which stuff kind of gets highlighted. So we may think that, oh, linkage institution, they're going to connect us to the politicians at all times. But in all actuality, sometimes we kind of view it as they're the ones deciding what we get to hear and the way it's portrayed to us. They are the gatekeepers of information, if you think of it that way. I'll give you an example. I remember when the Ebola outbreak was happening in Western Africa, and we had a few cases that were getting into the United States. Uh, Ebola became attention. Um, it got into the attention of the news media for about a month or so, where the media was talking about it all the time. They were talking about Ebola, Ebola, Ebola. They were talking about those specific cases, and then they just stopped. They stopped talking about it. It wasn't as much of a focus anymore. Did Ebola go away? No, it didn't go away. In fact, the federal government was getting even more involved with, helping people in Western Africa to understand the symptoms of Ebola and to prevent the spread of Ebola. So it wasn't like the virus went away at all. It just went away from the news perspective. It wasn't as captivating anymore by the news media, and the people weren't as receptive or interested anymore. So the news media moved on to a different story. Okay, next one, watchdog. Think of it this way: if we don't have the media, who holds politicians accountable? We would never really know what they're doing. If you didn't have print or videos or radio, you would have no idea what politicians are actually doing. So you could never hold them accountable. They could be completely corrupt and you would never know it. In fact, the media has acted more like a watchdog really in the last 50 years as it's moved into kind of an investigative journalism standpoint, where they're investigating politicians, they're investigating what they say, they're investigating what they do, they're looking deep into bills. They're uncovering scandals. Whenever a scandal is breaking out in politics, it has a lot to do with this watchdog function. If we don't have media, and I've had people talk about like, oh, wouldn't the world be better if we just never had media? If we never had media, politicians could do whatever they want, and you would never know. Last thing, I mean, not politicians, mass media acts kind of as a scorekeeper, as in it kind of keeps track of who's winning or losing in politics. It helps us decipher information in a different way, where media kind of comments on what's going on in politics and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. Because once again, there's so much stuff going on in politics, so much stuff going on in the campaign that people aren't able to keep track of it all on their own. Now, media also does have a potential problem at times. Like they tend to focus on horse race journalism. When it comes to the election, they're focusing on who's winning in the polls. Let's talk about who's winning in delegates. They're not talking about the issues. That's one of the problems of horse race journalism. They're always focusing on who's winning, who's in the lead, and not talking about the issues they care about. Like we can talk all we want about, the polls leading up to the Democratic primary that we've been looking at all year, but talking about the actual issues that they care about, that's something the media tends to avoid. It tends to be too deep. It tends to be stuff that people don't tune in for. They don't tune in for a lengthy discussion of the different healthcare policies of the candidates. They tune in to hear about who's winning, and for very very small sound bites of information, very small snippets of that info. And we'll talk about sound bites in a little bit. What does the data on this graphic suggest about future of journalism? Well, it suggests that the future of journalism is online, that things are moving online. I can go to my, Amazon Fire TV in the other room, and I can pull up YouTube and watch news. I can pull up an app and I can watch the news there. I can get news off my phone, off Facebook, off the news app, off the New York Times app. It's moving away from TV, radio, and print. People are cutting the cord from their cable. People are not listening to radio. They're listening to podcasts that they choose online. And in fact, the more choice you have, the more you lead to almost narrow casting, which we'll talk about in a moment. Also, what we've seen in the last really since 1996 is media conglomeration. Media organizations have been buying up other media organizations. Now, before 1996, this was very much regulated. News companies and TV channels couldn't buy up each other. But today, a media organization can swallow up other media organizations. And this creates a giant media conglomerate. A conglomerate is a company of companies, like AT&T. It swallowed up a lot of other things. Or think Disney. A lot of you are probably thinking Disney right now. Today, we've reached a point where there's a lot less corporations out there. Think of every channel on TV: ESPN, ABC, um, MTV, VH1. All these channels used to be different channels, owned by themselves, owned by their own corporations. And today they've all kind of been swallowed up by giant media conglomerates. Kind of like, other business conglomerates. I always think of like Pepsi. Pepsi owns, a bunch of chip companies, a bunch of oatmeal and cereal companies, a bunch of soda industries. They own shares in Ocean Spray. They own a bunch of, restaurants. When you wonder why in Wisconsin Rapids they have a KFC mixed with a Taco Bell, well, they're owned by the exact same company, so it doesn't even matter. If you ever wondered why Munchies snacks have things like Lay's and Doritos and Sun Chips and Fritos and pretzels in them, well, they're all owned by the same company. So they're capitalizing on the fact that they're all owned by the same corporation. So we've seen these conglomerates not just in media, but we've certainly seen a lot in media, and it certainly impacts you a lot. I always think of News Corp. News Corp is the corporation that owns Fox News, and it doesn't just own Fox News; it owns a bunch of other local news networks and local newspapers. And if you buy up a bunch of news organizations, you could push them in your ideological direction. If you wonder why Fox News is more conservative, it's because its ownership is more conservative. And in the big scheme of things, it's pushed for more conservative hires, more conservative commentary on the news. So media conglomerates have fueled more potential bias. In fact, they've definitely led to a lot of bias. And the more bias you have in the news, the more that leads to polarization, that political polarization we were talking about earlier. Here's some of the major, media news conglomerates. You got News Corp in the bottom left. You got Viacom, owner of MTV and VH1 and Nickelodeon and a bunch of other things. You got Walt Disney and their ownership of pretty much everything: ABC, ESPN, all that jazz. A bunch of magazines, a bunch of book companies. You got AOL Time Warner, which owns Warner Brothers and CNN and a bunch of books once again. AOL. So you have all these gigantic corporations that have been created. And the bigger your company gets, the bigger your monopoly on the media gets, the less you really have to care about the product you're producing. until there's some other competition like Netflix, then you don't have to worry as much about literally what you put out there because there's no alternatives. So the bigger our media conglomerates get, the less likely the content is tuned to what the people want and more towards profits. Here's another look at what the Walt Disney Company owns, because it's always one thing that people are interested in. You know, when I buy a book for like Cars, my kids always really liked Cars. Cars, the movie franchise, that's owned by Disney, and they put out books through Hyperion, so you can buy a book, and Disney's utilizing their book company to produce those books. Oh, why would a magazine like ESPN have ads about some random Disney product? Well, it's owned by the exact same company. Why would Disney want to buy up some toy companies? Oh, so they can produce more toys for their movies and TV shows. Why would they buy up some Broadway theaters? Oh, so they can make Disney Broadway shows. They're branching out into different realms of media to make more potential money. Now, the bigger your news organization gets, the more likely you're going to lead to some narrowcasting. What ends up happening in narrowcasting, I'll define it for you here, is when you produce content for your viewership. And what I mean is that, like, Fox News produces more conservative content to keep their conservative viewers, and MSNBC produces more liberal content to make sure they keep getting their liberal viewers. They're producing content that their current viewers want to see. So they're narrowly focusing in on specific clients they want to broadcast to. They are narrowcasting. And they can do this because they're giant media conglomerations and there's not a lot of alternatives. So Fox can focus on trying to get all of the more conservative viewership, and MSNBC can try to get all the more liberal viewership, and everything in between can try and get everyone in between. Because this is all leading to the media bubble or the media filter that we're seeing today, where in today's world, I can choose my news, and my news can be as biased as I want it to be. So Trump supporters, they can follow a bunch of other Trump supporters on Twitter and only hear positive things about Trump. And Clinton or Biden or Obama supporters, they can view all the more liberal things they want and they'll never see anything negative about those folks and never see anything positive about Trump. So each side, of our political spectrum is able to become more and more filtered and more in their own media bubble. Think about how social media works. I go onto Facebook and I like certain news networks. I like news networks that provide me news that I'm interested in. This is me putting myself in my own bubble, not finding news that I disagree with, news that I agree with and that I'm interested in. And then the algorithms of Facebook give me more of that because they want to hook you in. Think of the news app on Apple, the Apple News app. It's looking at what articles you are looking at and then trying to give you more of that. So people get stuck in their own bubble and don't hear about anything else. And this creates more polarization. If you're wondering another factor that's impacting political polarization today, it's definitely the media. Look at this. You definitely can see some media bias. Here in this graphic, people in red voted for Trump. People in blue voted for Hillary Clinton. Does what you tune into impact how you vote? You bet. And you see probably the most even network is C-SPAN, and C-SPAN is just airing literally Congress. It's airing a live stream of Congress throughout the day, and it's as neutral as you can get because you're just seeing them talk about stuff. Whereas Fox News and MSNBC are not just covering news, they're commentating on news. And this is why you really have to think about bias. And if you look at an organization like All Sides, they've tried to organize the media organizations into a chart like this. So you can see which areas they might be more biased in. I know it's cut off a little bit, but over here on the left, you got more left leaning, lesser left leaning, you got center news organization, you got right leaning, and you got far right leaning. And I'd recommend you check out allsides.com. It's a great website to see different perspectives on different news of the day. For example, you can pull it up and you'll see a left leaning article, a right leaning article, and a center article. And you can see not only how it's portrayed by one of the center groups, one of the more neutral groups, but you can also see how each side is slanting it in their direction, how they're spinning it. Spin is probably the correct term. Spin is when you change the media to benefit your specific side. You'll also see on here that there's some differences here between opinion and news. Fox, when it's just the main news network during the day, it's just sharing news. But at night, it turns into a political commentary show. Stuff like Hannity and Rachel Maddow, those shows are commenting on the news. Rachel Maddow is much more liberal. She's on MSNBC. Hannity is on Fox, and they're presenting the news in a more liberal or conservative slant. Because they are opinion shows, they are not news shows. The news shows tend to happen during the day. So we have some very stark differences between the media here. And guess what? If you're only tuning into one network, leads to more political polarization.